Hello there, welcome back to the agenda. Right, I've got a question for you. I want to know if you're struggling with long COVID, or if you have ever struggled with long COVID. Did you contract it recently, or is it a legacy from back when the disease was a pandemic? Please do get in touch. Today is International Long COVID Awareness Day, and I guess we're keen to sort of create our own little community around it on the radio this morning. According to campaigners, the condition is affecting more than 65 million people worldwide. I just pause for a sec there. 65 million people. And there's a growing list of over 200 possible symptoms. I mean, that must make it impossible to treat. For some people, I suppose it's just an annoyance. You know, you might get a bit of brain fog for a month. For others, it really leads to a dramatic decline in quality of life. So we have a theory in our family. You know how you have these sort of family theories, that my husband has had long COVID because I think he struggled with sinusitis his whole life. But then when he came out here, it was all right for a few years. And then he got COVID. And since then, it's just been absolutely awful. And I don't know whether, sometimes you hear about long COVID causing inflammation. And I just wonder whether, you know, if his nose was already sensitive, whether long COVID means that it's sort of more inflamed. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where you just don't know whether it was COVID that caused it or not. But certainly it does seem to, if we sort of track it back, the moment when his symptoms became really acute seems to have been around the time he caught COVID. Anyway, gives you a sense of sort of how ephemeral the disease can be, you know, because you just don't know, do you? Joining me now is one person who has definitely really struggled, though, with long COVID, is Carrie. And actually, Carrie, we spoke to you around about this time last year, bizarrely. And I think we sort of do our annual check-in with you. How are you at the moment? Are you struggling with long COVID at the moment?
Thank you, Georgia, and thank you for bringing this up still. I read the other day that we're going into the 5th year of long COVID, which is a bit of a shock because it feels like yesterday I spoke to you the first time, and yet you say 65 million people, which I think, by the way, is a very, very low number. It was last year, and I think most people with long COVID are not aware of it. So imagine then how high the number really, really is. I think the number they're saying now in the US is actually 1 of 4. And even from my side, you know, being more or less alone, now I'm getting 2 to 3 messages a week from friends of friends who are asking for help, and it's just growing, which is really, really shocking. But to answer your question, I am actually good, and I am so lucky to be able to say that. So I started my long COVID journey in 2020. Coming in on the 5th year then again also. It's been a long journey, but I think I'm finally out on the other side, and having obviously learned a lot on that journey, hopefully I can share a little bit of insights from my experience today.
I have to say, I didn't know you were over it. That is such enormously good news, because the last few times we've spoken, and obviously I follow your journey on Instagram, it's clearly been a very, very long, hard struggle for you. Can you tell me a bit more about the symptoms that you used to suffer?
Yeah, like you said, it's hard to summarize symptoms because if you mentioned 200, I'm pretty sure I was up towards 100, and just random, everything from rashes to the face. It starts small, so rashes to the face, you're pulling muscles, you have bruises, like things that you don't really connect to. In my case, long COVID didn't exist, so you know you had no idea, right? But that's why I said you mentioned your husband there, and I think there's so many things that then later turn out to be long COVID related. But my symptoms eventually turned into be really severe. So I couldn't get out of bed, sound sensitivity. I would sleep for like 16 hours. I couldn't have light. I couldn't remember anything, emails, friends' names, who I'd met the day before. So, I found out later that I had micro blood clots in my entire body that had created oxygen limitation, and also as a result brain damage. So I was very lucky. So last year I found help, and after that my journey changed, but through the alternative holistic way, which is also interesting because I kind of had given up with the traditional Western medicine way. So
I mean, I think that is the challenge for many people, and a bit later on the program we are going to speak to Dr. Sweta Adatia, who obviously is a a sort of formal doctor, a traditional doctor, but I'm sure she's got a very open mind to these things. So we're going to find out a little bit more about the potential treatments. So tell me a bit about how you found out that you had these micro blood clots all over your body.
Yeah. So I was fortunate to go into a health center that had recently opened, and they had scanned the world for the latest technology. I mean, we're very fortunate in the UAE where we have a lot of, elitist investments into everything really, but specifically in healthcare. And this center, Kintsugi in Abu Dhabi, they had scanned the world and really brought the latest technology to Abu Dhabi. And there they had machines within the quantum physics world and bioresonance, where they, through just a body scan, you put things on your head and it kind of scans down to a cellular level. And then they can, through a global database, read how the cell reacts and how it is, doing really. So it's completely different from kind of the normal blood analyzers or scanning your heart or ultrasounds. It's just down on a cellular level, which, to be honest, moving forward in healthcare, I think that is the way forward, because you just find out so much more. And the key with the body is that it's connected, right? So it's more the body, mind, soul, and also to do with energies. How is the energy flowing in your body? Which, whether or not you believe in it, I completely changed my mind in this field because I've learned about that whole holistic connection. So through this bioresonance, they could find the micro blood clots, and then I was treated totally homeopathic wise on a blood detox. That a couple of weeks later, I started to feel like myself again, like just for a second a day, and then the next week 5 minutes per day. And through that, it got me well enough to travel, because I was bedbound really. And I went to Croatia, where this kind of guru within this field is. And after a week in his basically, it's not a hospital, because I don't believe in having a hospital because it's mentally connected to something negative. So they have an apartment where you go and you sit in front of really ancient traditional techniques. It's more about impacting the cell, and basically, if you think of it as a car, we're very run down today, where 5Gs, heavy metals and foods, stress levels, maybe not the purest water we're drinking, so many things that have impacted our body during a long time. And then they basically make the cell strong again. And no matter what illness you have, if you are balanced in your body, we're lucky that our bodies are actually miracle workers in themselves. And so their theory is that as long as we make you strong enough, you can fight the rest of whatever you're facing through that.
I mean, it sounds amazing that you found this treatment that works for you. Obviously, I have to on the radio emphasize that it's not a sort of proven treatment. It is an alternative treatment. But the reality is that that's what you had to seek out in order to make yourself better, which gives us all a sense of just how difficult it is to find a cure for this illness. I presume that you had to pay for that. That's not going to go on the insurance, is it?
No, and yeah, I echo you in that. I think the challenge that a lot of long COVID patients are facing is that all your test results are fine. And we're very fortunate in the UAE. We're all on medical insurance. We can all go and do all of these checkups. But I remember spending 2 weeks with different experts every day doing all the tests you can do. And every single test came back, saying you're as fit as a marathon runner. And I couldn't walk a single step without having to sleep for a week, basically.
That is so deeply depressing and disheartening. And oddly enough, we've had it slightly in our family in the past. My husband will go to the doctor and say, I'm experiencing this, this, and this. They do a scan of his head and they're like, well, you should be fine. And it's the most frightening experience you can go through when a doctor tells you you're fine and you're like, no, I'm really not. And then you're left in there's this vacuum of nowhere to go. And I'm so grateful, so thankful that you managed to find, a treatment that has indeed worked for you. Absolutely. Carrie, it's always a great pleasure to get you on the radio. Thank you very much. I'm going to do that very brief health check there, which I'm sure you'll understand that, obviously if you are experiencing long COVID, if you're experiencing illnesses, then, your first step has to be your doctor. If you're looking for community support, then it sounds like, as Carrie said, it's a very good option. You can find it online. There are lots of people there who who have been through similar experiences and maybe can help you through it as well. But certainly as far as medical advice is concerned, on the radio, I have the responsibility to say that you must go to your doctor, not read stuff on the internet. And I know that Carrie would want me to say that as well. So, Carrie, amazing to have you on, as always. Thank you very, very much indeed for sharing your experience. I know you really, really struggled with long COVID for a long time. We're talking about long COVID on the programme today, in part because it is International Long COVID Awareness Day. It's not an official UN day, but it is one that lots of sufferers, lots of campaigners for those who are suffering have targeted because it is such a major cause for concern. Up to 65 million people worldwide struggle with the condition, and there's a growing list of over 200 possible symptoms. So how many people are actually struggling with it right here in the UAE? If you've had it or if you've got it, I'd love to hear from you. Do get in touch. But we're also joined now on the line by Dr. Sweta Adatia. She's a specialist neurologist at Gargash Hospital, where she runs the long COVID programme. Now, we speak to Dr. Adatia on a regular basis, but we haven't actually spoken for about a year. So thank you so much for joining me on the line now. I'd be really interested to know how things have changed over the last year, Dr. Adatia. But let's start with how many people in the UAE have long COVID, according to your research.
So thank you, Georgia. Always, it's a pleasure to talk about COVID because there are so many sufferers. As of today, also, there are some small variants. About 300,000 people are still getting afflicted by COVID. But we're talking of long COVID. So there were three types of infections which COVID had, right? There was a mild infection, moderate, and then a severe one. So the moderate to severe one, some of them were in the ICU or the critical care unit. So the research and this report says, which is pretty much fairly a global number, I would say, and we are not any different. The people who were in the moderate to severe infection, about 1/3, which was about 25 to 30%, 3 to 5% carry on to have a long COVID. And not necessarily also the ones who went to the ICU, but the moderate ones who were suffering from the COVID had symptoms which persisted. And when we say long COVID, what we define by the CDC or WHO as anything which is lasting beyond a few weeks, a couple of months, and then you still suffer from it, which is long COVID.
Okay, so are you still seeing new patients, or has the rate declined?
So the rates have tremendously declined. We as a human race also have a short-term memory, right? So people have started to stop correlating things from the COVID because it's been a long time. But I must specify and say that there's something called the chronic fatigue syndrome, which means tiredness, exertional fatigue. You're not able to perform well. Sleep issues in focus and concentration are still the ongoing symptoms that we see in the clinic. And it is the after effects of that post-COVID infection which is going on. So I would say somewhere 3% is a good rough ballpark figure where people are still struggling. And I think last time also we spoke about it, Georgia, that people cannot be completely, functional or completely back to life unless they do all the changes in their lifestyle, which we have been propagating for these patients as well.
Do scientists, do doctors, do you have any idea what could be causing the long-term condition?
Fantastic question. As a scientific community, we are trying to figure out, and we can have one derivative from HIV infection. So HIV is also a viral infection. And what was happening or what is happening in HIV is that there are some episodic fluctuations in the health condition which happens, and exactly the same phenomena as a scientific community we have observed with COVID. So people who had long COVID get these episodic problems or fluctuations in their health condition, which can range all the way from having fatigue, tiredness, what I just spoke about, or memory confusion, issues with immunity, getting more susceptible to other infections, etc. And it's exactly the same. There are certain scales or rehabilitation patterns which have now been devised by the scientific fraternity to help patients. So there's one very popular scale called the Yorkshire scale. So people can actually measure what is that difficulty that they are facing. And essentially it is all related to the fatigue syndrome or the chronic fatigue syndrome.
What type of treatments are you recommending? Because, with 200 symptoms, how do you narrow it down? How do you figure out what medicines you can give?
So the first thing, a lot of people start to take over-the-counter supplements, thinking that, oh, all these supplements are healthy and helpful for me, but that's not true. So what you entirely need is a perfect sort of a lifestyle consultation where you know the exact amount of the vitamin D, vitamin B12, the diet type of the exercises that you put in. I mean, a post-exertional fatigue is just counterintuitive, but you essentially must have an exercise routine so that you can counteract the fatigue. Having some form of breathing, some meditation techniques, etc. Essentially also working with a fitness coach, all this can go a long way. So what we propose is that if you are suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome, please do not take it lightly. You need to actually have a formulated lifestyle plan, which you can sit and talk to a psychologist, a medical doctor, as well as a fitness person and a dietitian, of course, to make it a routine. I mean, I brush my teeth every day. You brush your teeth every day. That's like our lifestyle routine, right? So essentially 20 to 30 minutes every single day, you need to start doing these changes, physiological, essentially we call it physiological because you're altering your entire physiology and system to fight out the infection. So that's absolutely recommended for these patients.
So interesting to speak to you as ever. Dr. Adatia, thank you so much for your time on the agenda today. Always really interesting. And I have to say, if anyone out there is suffering with long COVID, definitely look up Dr. Sweta Adatia. She's a specialist neurologist. She's at Gargash Hospital. And one of her responsibilities there is to run the long COVID programme. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Dr. Adatia. It's been great to have you on. Right.
By 103.8.
Join the conversation.